customers are doing things today, we see these three different sort of life cycles. We kind of see them as silos, but I wanted to kind of unpack each of these. So we're going to look at it is, what is that first phase of you going through the discovery? Some of you, being here, you must probably already have passed this phase, but I want to unpack what that discovery and learning and how to continuously learning and improving. Because serverless, it continuously improves. As technology, we've all learned is, you go on leave and you have to come back through new high training and have to revamp yourself every time because technology moves so quickly. And how do you keep current then? So once you've established, serverless is the way to go, and you want to, establish a use case, and you're going to start developing an application, you really want to start looking at tooling that's going to help you develop the application fast. You want it to be very, as you've traditionally done it, working with an IDE, being able to stand up and doing testing. You really want to have powerful tooling to help you as a developer or as a company move faster. So we'll unpack that. And then once you've got it and you've got your application up and running, it's passed all local testing, and you want to get it out into production, that deploy phase is critical, and that's something we could spend hours on, but we're going to touch briefly on that. And then once you've got your application in production and it's serving your customers and they're giving this phenomenal experience, you really want to have monitoring and visibility in place to understand end-to-end how that application is working, and that you kind of monitoring is helping you drive in the right direction, and you're improving your customer experience day in, day out. If there's any problems, how do you kind of see it end-to-end when that application things are going wrong? Serverless kind of breaks things up in this decoupled architecture. You really want to pinpoint and dive quickly to a pain point and solve that quickly. And tooling like Epsilon really helps you find those problems and address them very quickly. So looking at that first cycle, when you started looking at serverless, first you thought it was a buzzword. You found a blog article that you read that made you a little excited, realizing that you don't need to manage a server anymore. But essentially, you started getting your hands dirty. You started, you found a walkthrough and you've launched a sample application. Maybe you've created something in an Alexa skill, or maybe just launched something in Lambda. But essentially, you started seeing this whole application framework folding out, and you're realizing that serverless makes things a lot easier when you start understanding it. So this first phase, we usually spend a lot of time trying to evangelize what this is. And essentially tooling like Stackery helps you be able to stand something up. They've got really good samples, and today we're going to unpack a good example here and what that looks like. So these are some of the partners that we work very closely with. Today we're going to be getting our hands dirty with Stackery. It's an amazing tool for you to actually visualize something, really put a POC together and showcase what serverless can do for your particular service team or your product or your company as a startup. The next part is, let's say we've got that application, we've done a little POC, you've got sign-off, or you want to start developing a serverless application. This is where you really want to have something that's very local. You're able to actually, do stuff in your traditional thing. You've got an IDE that you're doing developments, you've got your application. You've got to figure out what tooling you have in place. And this is something that we really looked at, and we thought, how do we help people do things in a native way? So we started putting together things like the Serverless Application Framework, and which is called SAM. We'll be unpacking that shortly, which includes a local CLI that you can actually stand up and do local testing and debugging. And Stackery is really well integrated with that. They've also launched a really cool feature that integrates to your IDE, which they'll be highlighting shortly. Yeah, so this is, we have a cloud IDE that we've called Cloudnine. It's a product that we've actually been evolving over a period of time since I think it was acquired. But this is something that you can actually do SAM CLI on. It's a really cool tool that I recommend at some point standing up and trying out. But today we're really going to focus on spending time in the Stackery console and unpacking that application in this workshop today. So when you get through that deploy phase, you've got your application, you want to push it out to production. There's many different ways to do this, and every company has very different styles of their sort of continuous integration pipeline pushing code out there. But just kind of give you an example, some people put in CloudFormation, some people use our abstracted version, which is serverless application model. People using serverless framework or their workflows, and essentially also looking at things like Terraform and building your own applications to release things to production. These are partners in that space, partners that really help drive this. I'm really excited to kind of see how Sapri is putting this all together. CloudBees, which is, many of you may know as Jenkins, a really cool tool to be able to get that in place. So today we'll really be diving into that. If you have any questions on how to do that, you've got a lot of smart people that are very excited about this topic in the room, so I encourage you to ask those questions. So something that I think, when you start moving to modern applications, you're moving to cloud, it kind of feels like it's no longer local, it's no longer present. You really want to have tooling in place to be able to monitor things. And this is where you want to have things like Epsagon in place, where you've got your serverless application out there, your customer base is growing significantly every day, you've got developers pushing applications out there. There's so many moving parts. You really want to align yourself with a tool that understands serverless applications end to end. And Epsagon has spent a lot of time understanding this problem and building tooling in the space to help you there. So today we'll be diving into that in the workshop. And from AWS side, you've got things that when you launch services from day one, you've got CloudWatch, which is collecting those metrics and logs. You also have something called X-Ray on AWS side, where you've got this end-to-end visibility application, which is something that you can look at application end-to-end and dive deeper in CloudWatch and metrics and so on. If you looked ever at monitoring space, there's a fair amount of monitoring partners out there. Some of them are very differentiated in how they're doing certain things. I work very closely with Epsagon and kind of seeing how they're really helping sort of microservices and serverless architecture application monitoring, which is something you'll actually stand up and put in today. So this is just kind of a little recap there. There's quite a bit of information that I covered in a short period of time. Okay, so some best practices. So anyone that actually has serverless apps today in some capacity? Okay, cool. You're almost probably very, very familiar with these applications, also these best practices, because this is what serverless traditionally actually is driving towards, is moving away from actually having servers where you're managing and so on. You're moving towards something where you're driving like infrastructure as code that's deploying resources and architecture underneath to support your application that differentiates you as a company. So, in the past you have your sysadmin guys having to go and stand up servers, and your developers working on the code, and at some point there's this cross path, or people are throwing things over the fence to the other team to try and do something, and there's never a good experience. Thanks to infrastructure as code that kind of changed the way we do things, and it's probably the first point of entry for me working in the cloud, is working with CloudFormation, really kind of seeing that first step of how you can take a single CloudFormation template, being JSON or YAML, defining these resources, and you can deploy that template with a couple of parameters, and you've got infrastructure that gets deployed. Couple of years rolling forward, you've got multiple different partners in the space that provides functionality in many different ways, but the real benefit comes in that infrastructure as code part. The next is automated integration. I'm going to talk about what we recommend in these places. I will unpack that shortly. And then monitoring and observability from day one. As I said, end to end, from the first time you start playing with the application, you should start putting tooling in place to see how you're moving. And there's many other best practices you can add on there. We have a couple of really deep dive workshops on YouTube, and a lot of articles that we've published on the service sort of blogs. I highly recommend checking out for more of those. So the benefits of infrastructure as code, no doubt, if you have a template that is going to deploy the underlying architecture to support your application. What's really cool about that is if you've made it very parameter driven, you have a lot of condition things in place, You can take this template and launch it as many times as you want to go deploy as many resources as you need. And what's cool about this is you can do version control, and you can also tie this into automated pipelines. So when you actually move over to that continuous integration part, you don't need people to go do the work anymore. You've got a prescriptive recipe, much like a cookbook or something that's actually going to do what you need to do from an infrastructure standpoint. So I briefly touched on this. CloudFormation is a service that we have that we've, our service teams work very hard on to make this functionality as easy as possible. And then, with the whole trend of serverless applications, we really looked at how to create something abstracted. So we created something called the serverless application